Well, first of all, you're very welcome and thanks for taking the time to come on the tour. The Botanic Gardens is here since 1795. It was originally set up as a garden for growing plants for medicinal purposes. So if you came here in that period, you would have seen plants that were used in medicine. Doctors had to study plants in those days. Botany was part of medicine. Still is, as far as I know. Then there was plants growing for herb purposes and dyeing for cloth. In around about the 1800s then, the Dublin Society, who were running the gardens, later the Royal Dublin Society, wanted to improve agriculture in the country. So if you came here in that period, you would have seen the likes of wheat, barley, oats, all the agricultural crops being grown to try and improve farming in the country. Then around about the 1820s or so, a lot of new plants started to arrive from different parts of the world. We were part of the British Empire at the time, so we were allocated a certain amount. So to accommodate these plants that would have come from climates that were different to our own, the glass houses were constructed, and I'll explain the history of them when we're going through them. So then in about the 1850s, the gardens switched more to botanical collection rather than agriculture collection. And then when the Free State was set up in the 1920s, the Department of Agriculture were running the grounds, and it was starting to deteriorate a bit, so the offices of Public Works took it over and started to restore the glass houses, and I'll explain each period of the restorations. Visitor centre was built, the grounds were improved in paths and that type of thing. So effectively we would have modernised and updated. So we're getting roughly around about 600,000 visitors a year now, so we're improving our visitor numbers. Now certain plants would have an acronym of Glasnevin with it, and there's a Solanum crispum Glasnevin is that particular plant up against the wall there. That would be a cross of a tomato plant and a potato style of plant. It's part of that family, the potato family. So just some plants would have been grown here in Glasnevin. Right, our first stop will be in the Alps. So we're heading into the Alpine House. Just before we go, I'll explain. We have a bonsai exhibition on at the moment, so...
Okay,
oh, sorry, not orchids, sorry, orchids.
Yeah, I was like,
this area, it's called our Alpine Yard, and this is the Alpine House. Now, just to point out the logistics of this hut, the doors are kept open, that's to keep it cool. The glass is to keep it dry, and if it gets too warm we put up the shading to keep it cool as well. So effectively these are plants that are growing in conditions where it's cool and dry. Usually cliff faces or mountain areas where they don't get too much soil, as you can see here. So they have to grow, some of them have to grow into clumps in order to conserve heat. You'll notice some of the trees there would be prostrate in size, they wouldn't get too big. They're growing in conditions that are relatively harsh. So alpines are a kind of a little specialised area. You get sort of alpine societies. If you look behind, you'll see this type of displays that you'd see in alpine houses and that type of thing that people are collectors thereof. The plants that you see around the edge would be more of a kind of a lower slope plant, and those ones there with the hairy leaves, that's to keep them warm. You know. So they develop their own ways of surviving in their harsh conditions. The bottom of that building has what we call our herbarium, and that would be containing plants that are pressed when they're in flower. They're dried and pressed and mounted. So you could go out there in the middle of winter and look at a plant in flower. It's held on a sheet of paper. There's roughly about 500,000 plants from all parts of the world, going back to roughly about the 1600s there. So there's quite a large collection of plants in the herbarium. The top part is the botanical library, and that will contain books relating to botany. And we also have a botanical art collection. Paintings going back to the Middle Ages, in fact, right there as well, on botanical subjects. And they're just taken out now and then for display. Now, I'll just mention some other scientific work we do here in the Botanic Gardens. You see the odd trees there with the numbers on it. We're kind of doing it, this is the year of science. So with students and children, we're organising them to monitor leaf or bud burst on trees. There's an old Irish saying, ash before oak, we're in for a soak. Oak before ash, we're in for a splash. So this is an ash tree, and as you can see, it's not in leaf yet. So the oak trees are in leaf. So the oak is out in leaf before the ash. So we're in for a sort of a wet summer, but not a soaking summer. Right. So if you get this tree coming into leaf before the oak tree, you can start getting worried about your summer weather. So basically, as you can see, that there's nothing come out in leaf yet on the ash tree, but the oaks have started their leaf. So we're monitoring when leaves come on trees in the country and in the gardens here. And we've noticed in the last 25 years since we've been doing it that spring is starting 3 weeks earlier and autumn is continuing for 3 weeks longer. So the growing season in the country has extended outwards by 6 weeks, which is good for farmers, but it's probably not good for climate change. So here we will be putting out our annual plants. So they would go in as seeds, in some cases straight into the ground, and they'll start to germinate soon. And then there's other ones that we call half-hardy annuals, and we have to start them off in the glass house and bring them out as soon as the dangers of frosts have passed. So they'll be coming out shortly. There's an iris collection coming into flower there on the right hand side. So we have kind of areas laid out by particular types of plants, annuals, hardy annuals. We'll be coming to tulips and that. This section that we're developing here in front of us, it's called our Wild Ireland section. So in Ireland you have several types of habitats for plants. You have the burren there with the rocks and the little cracks in them. And
you need the dolmen.
Yeah, we'll have to put a dolmen in, yeah.
To put the dolmen on.
There's a certain unusual feature about the burren in that in the cracks Mediterranean plants can survive, and on the surfaces alpine plants can survive. Wow. So you get a total contrast of flora growing in the burren that doesn't grow anywhere else. So it's an unusual habitat. Other areas, like you'd have a seaside planting there where it's sandy. We're setting up wildflower meadows. We'll be flooding an area over there for bog planting. There's an oak woodland been set up there for oaks, and just general flora of Ireland in the one spot. So eventually that'll have all of Ireland's flora. So if anything is threatened with extinction or under threat, we'll have it here as well and be able to save the plant. Okay, I'll just explain. This is a kind of the bluebell woodland area, and it's in flower now, so it's nice to be in the middle of it. But just to explain what happens in nature, these are flowers that will flower in spring before the leaf cover canopy has built up on the trees. So they're getting the light before they're suddenly shaded in. So they have to do all their flowering before the trees completely obscure and shade them in. So that's the way sort of spring flowers work in practice. You'll see in other areas we're passing where they have we would have had snowdrops, anemones and various other spring flowering daffodils and tulips and that. So that's just in nature how plants work. These are normally found in where there would be old forests as well. If you see a lot of bluebells in a field, it meant there was once an old forest in there in the past. The trees we're passing here are our oaks, and as you can see they're starting to come into leaf, so we're all right for the summer weather. This is just a collection of trees, oaks from all around the world. Here in the Botanic Gardens we lay out plants by their families. So all the oaks are in one area, ash trees, pines, sycamores. So that's just the traditional way of laying out Botanic Gardens. But we have another garden down in Wicklow called Kilmacurra, and there we're laying out the plants by their continents where they come from. So you'll have a Chinese area with all the Chinese plants, South America, etc. So that's been developed at the moment in Kilmacurra and Wicklow. I'll just explain a couple of things outside of the garden before I talk about the garden itself. You'll see those lumps on the trees up there. That's a mistletoe. Mistletoe is a parasite, and it will grow on the branch of the tree. Eventually it gets very large and it'll pull down the branch. You can see it's starting on various parts of the tree as well as the missel thrush is the main eater of the berry. So when he eats the seed of the missel thrush, it sticks to his beak and he scrapes it off onto another branch. So it starts off again up another branch. So that's just the mistletoe. The round tower, just to explain, that's the delimiter of the cemetery. In the past, they used to have round towers to keep out the body snatchers. So I'll just explain the way the walled garden here is set up. First of all, we have the glass house here for growing things like your vines and your peaches that wouldn't grow outdoors. They need a bit of heat. Then, as you were coming up, you would have passed all the herb beds. So they're all just different herbs that we use. There's an area here with what we call a square foot garden. So if people haven't got very much space or even a pot, it just gives you an idea what you could do in a square foot. So that's just different ideas. Then we have apple trees from Seed Savers in County Clare for every county in the country. Underneath the apple trees we grow what we call green manure. There's different crops we use, but the particular one we have there is called Facilia, and that has double purpose. When that comes into flower, the bees will head for it. We have our beehives in behind the glass fence there, and the bees were piped in here last week, just for the record. They were brought in here, so they're just settling down now. But they will eat or go to the flower on the apple trees and the Facilia. They also eat the larvae of the codling moth that attacks the apples. So they do a job for us as well as pollinating the apple trees. And then when that crop is finished, we just dig it into the ground as green manure. So that just saves us having to fertilise the soil every year. A lot of unpaid workers here in this garden, you know, besides the bees. We keep this kind of a wild life garden, and you'd have hedgehogs and frogs, and that's an insect hotel. So you get your ladybirds and all nesting in there. So they would come out in the evening, like the hedgehog would come and eat the snails and slugs for us, and the frogs as well. The ladybirds attack the green fly. So without having to employ any chemicals at all, we can control all the pests in the ground, you know, so it's a way of keeping the garden organic. I just mentioned that we're going to kind of keep to this side of the garden, but down at the far end there's another 20 acres of woodland. So that's just basically trees laid out in different chestnuts and sycamores and all the other styles of trees. But I'll just point out one or two trees. You probably know the yew. Taxus baccata is a Latin name. But in the past the yew was used for making longbows. So the wood on it was quite flexible. And the archers used to be known as the yeomen. And then it got corrupted to the yeomen. But in recent times, from the leaf of the yew tree, they're squeezing out a juice called Taxol. And Taxol has been used in the treatment of cancer. So it shows you like that there's property in plants still that are of medicinal use, you know. So the Latin, as I say, is Taxus for yew and Taxol is the medicine. So poison is what we thought the yew was, but administered in the right doses it'll cure you. I'll just explain the area just up here. That's our herbaceous border, and in the summertime, like this, you can see the stakes. Like the plants will grow so high they'll be having to be staked, but it's only starting now, so it's basically we have to go back later in the year, July or so. And the area just behind me here then is our rockery, and that'll be just basic rock growing plants. We have a cedar, a Lebanon and all here. For people who haven't got this much space in their back garden, there's these kind of little tubs that you can use for rockery plants, rather than having to go and construct one of this down at the end of the garden. Okay, we just continue this way. Just explain, this is a map of Ireland with the geological features that you'll find in the country. So for example, limestone is probably the most common rock in the central plain of Ireland, and limestone has what we call alkaline soil on it. Granite is more sort of Wicklow Mountains, mountainous areas, and granite soil is acid soil, so you get acid soil and alkaline soil. Gypsum is found up around Cavan, that's used for making plaster boards. Chalk and flint up in the north. Basalt, which is the Giant's Causeway, of course. You get yellow sandstone in Donegal and red sandstone around Cork. And quartz, which is used for making microchips and various other rocks. Now it's only a selection, like there's still a few more that we have in the country, but that's just the main features. So it just gives you an idea of the rock features in the country. We'll head up this way and you can see the Japanese acers and the waterfall, and you get this kind of nice little effect here. But when you look back this way, you'll see a line of yew trees. This particular line of yew trees dates from before the Botanic Gardens were here in the 1700s. It's known as the Addison Walk. Joseph Addison was a poet who used to visit here. The pub out across the road is called the Addison. But the Addison, Joseph Addison anyway, visited here, and this was planted in his honour, obviously. And just to explain, this is just a prostrate form of what we call the ginkgo biloba. Ginkgo is a tree that it survived the nuclear bomb in Hiroshima. It was the first plant to regrow after the nuclear explosion. It's quite an old variety of tree. But from the ginkgo, in recent times you'll see a property called ginkgo tablets. It's used for memory loss. So it has properties in it for helping memory loss. The tree just behind me here, you see it coming into flower. It's called the handkerchief tree, because it looks like when they get bigger, it looks like there's handkerchiefs hanging off it. This has an Irish association in that there was a chap called Augustine Henry. Augustine Henry was trained as a doctor, and he got a job then with the English customs. And the English customs were running the customs in China in the 1890s. There was a strike by the customs, Chinese customs officials, and the English were asked would they run the customs during the strike, which they did. And the Chinese discovered they were getting a lot more money as a result, because the English weren't taking off, hiving off as much as the Chinese were. So they were left run the customs for a while. So there was up the Yangtze River, there's a town called Ai Chang, and Augustine Henry was sent there. And he was noticing that a lot of the material going through the customs was plants for medicinal use. So being a doctor himself, he wanted to know what plants they were. So he arranged to have herbarium specimens, pressings made of the plant, and sent to Kew Gardens in London for identification. In his time in China, he sent 500,000 samples back. 2,000 of them were unknown to the West. One of them was this handkerchief tree here. So there was great interest shown in getting this handkerchief tree back to Europe. So Augustine Henry would have been responsible for a lot of plants coming from China to the West. And you might see the odd tree with his name on it, like rhododendron augustinia or Lilium henryi, and various Augustine Henry names. So that's our Irish connection to botany. Now, this is one of the oldest trees in the garden. It's a copper beech. It's actually so big that you can see it from Google Earth when you're looking on Google. So this particular tree, as you can see from the girth of it, is quite wide. But it has a few problems, and you'll see these little brackets coming out at the side and the sort of fungus growing at it. So that's indication that this tree is on its deathbed, basically, it's dying. So it's around 250 years old. So we would say that a beech tree wouldn't live for more than 200 years. So it's probably on its last legs. But we're keeping it because it's still in leaf and flower. And it's a fine specimen tree. There's no danger of it falling. It's in a good sheltered spot here. I'll just explain our pond here. It's fed by rainwater, so it's fresh water generally. And it's quite full of life, in fact, frogs and small little insects. And the ducks are quite happy here, and you get various water hens, a few seagulls even. So this particular spot is just for growing water plants like water lilies and other oxygenating plants. So this is just our water pond area.
Seen them in Marino just yesterday.
So you might have seen a picture on yesterday's Irish Times of a seagull heading off with a baby duck. There's other plants that are a problem in the countryside, and this is another one. It's called gunnera, or giant rhubarb is another name for it. But as you can see, each one of these little stalks here has a couple of hundred seeds on it. So you'd have literally millions of seeds on that. So one of the things our botanists do with Mayo County Council is we go out to where those plants are growing quite heavily, cut out the seed heads and put Roundup down into it and try and kill it off. It's invaded Achill Island, Clare Island, parts of Mayo and Galway, and it's actually, because the leaves get so big, it crowds out the native flora, so you have to keep it under control. The big tree behind there, it's called the giant redwood, and originally when that was collected in America in the 1850s and brought over to Europe, it was called the Wellingtonia, after the Duke of Wellington. The Americans weren't at all happy with an American tree being called after an English general. So it was agreed then that we'd call it after a Cherokee chief. So it's named after Sequoia, chief of the Cherokees. So the Sequoia dendron is the Latin name. And a similar story with this lad here. In the 1994, a chap called David Noble was abseiling down a gorge in the Wollemi National Park in the Blue Mountains outside of Sydney. The gorge is there, they can go for nearly a mile deep into the ground. And in that gorge he discovered a stand of trees growing that he didn't recognise. So he sent samples back to Sydney Botanic Gardens. They didn't come across it before. Samples were sent to worldwide, and the only record that existed of these trees were fossils. And the fossils dated to 200 million years ago. Okay, I'll just explain the way the planting is laid out here. To my left is plants from South America, and in front of me here are plants from South Africa, and behind me are plants from Australia. And since the introduction of DNA, we discovered that plants in South Africa have the same DNA as plants in Australia and in South America. So this would have been as a result of continental drift. The three continents were once joined together, so the plants were basically growing on the same style areas. But then they drifted apart and they went into different climatic conditions. So the Banksias had to develop to harsher, dry conditions. The South African plants probably had more colder conditions. Right, I'll just explain this particular section here. Just for demonstration purposes, we show people where their food comes from on the plants. So for example, this is your coffee bush. So you get your coffee beans from that. Your avocados, the olive of course. There's a lemon tree, there's tea leaf plants. There's even rice growing there and just sugar cane. Just the various economic plants really, just to show what they look like before they end up as a package on the supermarket. They're called epiphytes. You get the odd orchid and you'll even get rhododendrons that they're climbing up trees to grow to get to light. So you'll see these growing on the high trees in the forest. Effectively they're using the tree as a support rather than trying to grow on the ground where they're not going to get light. So these are plants we call epiphytes. They don't actually damage their parent plant, but they just grow. So you'll see orchids and rhododendrons growing on branches of trees here. The Irish flora would be kind of roughly about 900 plants. But because we were cut off after the Ice Age from Europe effectively, some plants didn't make it after the ice melted. But some plants stayed here and survived. And the likes of the arbutus here, that would be the strawberry tree that you'd find in Kerry and in Sligo. That would have survived in an area where the ice didn't affect. And the arbutus is a tree that it's only found in Spain, Portugal, Greece and Ireland. So it didn't get to France or England or Germany. So it's one of our unique flora trees. So certain plants like, as I was mentioning, the burren as well, Mediterranean plants survive in the last ice age. So we have a few unique plants to the flora. This glass house was bought as a kit for £800 in 1884 and it was put together in one season. In those days, when we were growing orchids here, they were being sold for 1,000 guineas. So we would have covered the cost of that house in no time. Effectively, it's divided into three sections. So we're going first of all into the desert plants, then we'll be into the tropical and then the orchid house. So when we go in, there's a couple, like that was completely refurbished in 2006. Sometimes when you go in there, it's almost like a rainforest. It's just completely clouded in. So it depends on how hot it is and steam. But the first section, we just go into the cactus house. Right, I'll just give a quick description of the cactuses. Cactuses, they would hold their water, store it, and their thorns are effectively their leaves. So if you were stuck for a drink, you just cut the cactus and get yourself a little drink. This glass house was restored in 2006. So the majority of the plants that you're looking at here were only planted in the last 6 years. So let's give you an idea of the rate of growth. The likes of the bamboo here, that grows at roughly a foot a week. And it's 60 metres to the roof, so we have to keep cutting it down. This particular tree here beside me, it's called the Cacaria aquatica. Some trees are pollinated by insects, some are pollinated by bats and birds. This one is pollinated by monkeys. So when it comes into flower, they stick their heads in and get pollen all over them and keep moving around.
Now how do you pollinate them here then?
So we don't have no monkeys,
Exactly.
but there's a few of them around. Coconut and just other plants. When you're passing the step here, you'll see a plaque for Ludwig Wittgenstein. He would have sat here in the 49, 51, so he would have been a philosopher, Viennese philosopher, so you might have come across him in your travels if you're studying philosophy. So he was inspired here. I'll just explain, this is our orchid house, and the type of plants that you find growing here are mostly orchids, but we also have what we call epiphytes, and that'll be the likes of this Spanish moss. If you're looking at pictures of the Mississippi Delta, you'll always see this hanging off the trees. It's just growing in the air. It takes its food from the air, and when you pour water on it, it'll turn green. Certain orchids will just grow hanging off the trees. You'll see the roots there growing as well. So they're trying to get to the light. There's other plants like staghorn ferns here behind you, and they're just growing on the branches of trees and collecting leaf litter for food.